on the show today, Simon Lowe. So Simon knows a lot of people I know in the yoga world, it turns out. Recommended, I think maybe originally Gary Carter, a friend of mine. Very well established as a yoga teacher. And I know he runs a beautiful retreat center because he's just walked through it with his laptop. And I was thinking, blimey, that looks nice, out in Spain. So Simon, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's hear a little bit about your story. How did you get interested in yoga and movement and all things somatic?
Well, it started for me actually in America. I had moved from London to live in the States. I was in the music business for many years. And while I was in Los Angeles, it started when I worked in New York, but I had a really bad back and it really became quite debilitating. And I had different treatments. You know, the chiropractic seemed to be everywhere in America at the time. Actually, I was having a treatment with a Chinese medicine. 39th generation. I thought he was extraordinary.
Wow.
He said, "No, I think you need yoga." And I went, "No, not my scene." Because really hadn't seen very much of it. And all I had seen were these odd little studios here and there. Yoga Works had just about opened, I think, by then. And everyone just seemed a little bit kind of hippie-like, which it sounds like a terrible critique, but it's just didn't seem like it was where I was, for want of a better term. And I think it was just fear of going into a less familiar environment again. And anyway, I was directed to Dr. Larry Payne, who, as it happened, lived in near Marina Del Rey. I lived in Hollywood at the time, and I drove down, had a one-to-one session with him. And apart from the fact that it was a bit of a disaster, because I basically fainted within about 5 minutes because I hadn't really taken a deep breath in my life before, let alone a conscious one.
Okay.
And as he looked down with this wry smile on his face to me, he said, "I think you might enjoy a group class." And I went, "Yeah, okay." And he told me when his classes were. I turned up, and I had a very, very deeply special experience, my first ever yoga class. And within a few weeks, my lower back condition was 80% better. I was out of pain and only experienced it, occasionally in certain positions and that. And I basically became a follower of yoga very quickly from that point onwards, and moved from my apartment in Hollywood down to the next street of his studio. And basically, I went almost every day, or every class that he taught. And also there was a wonderful teacher, God bless her, she's no longer with us, called Estelle Jacobson. And she would teach at the studio also, and also on the beach in Marina Del Rey, which was fantastic. Always remember that the very first class I did with her, when she was teaching, we were asked to bring sheets with us to the beach.
Okay.
We all put our bed sheets out on the sandy beach, and which incidentally I've found to be quite a useful thing, better than a yoga mat when you're on the sand. And we were about 10 minutes into this gently flowing class with this wonderful lady in her mid to late 80s. And the school of dolphins just turned up right in front of where we were practicing. And for the entire class, they were just jumping out of the water and swimming around, but always present. And as soon as the class finished, they disappeared, just swam off. And I remember that early experience. One had heard a lot about yoga and how it conjured there was a lot of magic and mystery, still is, thankfully, around yoga. And it really kind of cemented that connection, because at the time I was really waking up to, after a pretty colorful experience in the music world, I was waking up to a different way of looking at life and participating in life, and it really had a profound effect on me. That so yoga became part of my life from that moment.
Were you, so the music industry, were you in the industry like as a business person or as a musician?
In the business, I started as a DJ. In the days, I was actually had one of the night shifts at the Speakeasy in London, when it was kind of like the Muso's late night club. And while I was also social secretary at one of the universities in London, Bedford College. And I went on from there to be an agent, from there into the record companies in London and New York. And then I was more into management after that in Los Angeles and back in England. And I left the business. There was a kind of a crossover period where I left the business for about 4 or 5 years. And I had a catering company with my partner in Hollywood. And at the same time, I was looking for new artists all the time. And then when I came back to England, I came back to England with my yoga teacher training certificate and experience. And basically, they both ran parallel for a little while, artist management and teaching yoga. But I realized that the former was not really evolving as my experience in the music business had before in a positive way. Things weren't really taking off in the same way. And whereas my teaching of yoga was. And I realized that actually I was a much happier person, much more healthy person. And I was meeting it's not fair to say nicer people, but certainly people who were not constantly wanting something from you, as was the case.
Maybe different values, maybe just healthier, happier. And I think people listening to this who maybe have started yoga in the last 10 years might not get that it's the kind of crossing that divide from going from, working in business and the music industry. Yoga was considered something a bit hippie. And I started after you, but certainly 30 years ago, there was that image of it. And it was more of a thing to step into the yoga studio. Right. And now we're in a different world where it's much more common, many more studios, or pre-COVID, we'll talk about that maybe. And, now you talk about agents in the music industry. I've been told there are yoga teacher agents now.
So I go.
This is the thing, apparently. So it's
met
almost
a few of them too.
You've met them. I'd love to hear what they're like. But it's sort of become a thing. Like people become yoga teachers to be famous now, to be well known, to have their picture on Instagram. It's the yoga rock star has become a thing in that time. So yeah, anything of on that transformation?
Well, it's interesting that how you describe that, because yes, I'd been pretty successful in the music business. I probably had far too much money, far too young, and a certain amount of influence that gave one a great sense of self-worth, I would say, as I understood it at that time, I might add. And then I found that when through these shifts, I had a wonderful time in the catering world and probably cooked and did parties for virtually every household name you've heard of in the A-list of movie stars. And that was a fascinating experience. And but then when I started teaching yoga, of course, starting in a world where very few people know what yoga was. And, my first class, I had one person, second class, I had two. And so it was a slow development. And I very honestly admit, I wanted to be successful. I wanted to be seen to be successful. But that didn't last very long. I realized after a while, actually, to be seen to be successful wasn't important. What was important was that what I was sharing helped people. And I started to find it, and actually, when we opened Triyoga, I lived in Primrose Hill. And so many of Primrose Hill residents would go to our first studio there, thankfully. And it was
just for listeners, Triyoga is a pretty established, one of the larger yoga studio chains in London. Great teachers, pretty high end. I've been there a bunch of times, but yeah, just for listeners might not have heard of Triyoga, it's pretty well known in the UK as an establishment really now. You were one of the people who started it, right? Yeah. Excuse me to interrupt, just for listeners.
No, not at all, not at all. But I kind of was just using the example. It's like it became very, very well known, and wherever I went in Primrose Hill, I would be bumping into students or residents who I would see almost daily coming into the studio. And I found after a while that kind of local, I would use the word celebrity isn't the right word, but so many people knew you. And even if I'm in the pub, which I like to frequent, and I'd be having a beer, and people would come up and say, "You drink beer?
Yes.
You're a yoga teacher."
Oh my God, how dare you?
I know, it was extraordinary. And anyway, after a while, I just thought, okay, I've actually had enough of living and working. And actually, I'd lived in Primrose Hill since my university days, and it had changed dramatically, become quite gentrified. The artistic,
pretty posh now, yeah.
Yeah. And so I ended up moving to a little cottage in Hampshire near my brother's family for a bit of complete anonymity during my private time. And that was fantastic. And although what was really, I have to laugh at it, because that was literally one of my primary reasons, apart from seeing my, spending more time with my brother's young children, who I just adored.
Yeah.
And actually being somewhere where I could walk, garden, and leave to teach and come back to in peaceful. And the day I moved in, there was a knock on my front door, and it was a local yoga teacher. Comes, "Oh, you're Simon Lowe. You've moved into our village. I want you to meet everybody." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you, but no, thank you."
Simon, could you speak a little bit more to that sort of niche fame or micro fame that I think quite a few of the listeners will have as well, like whether it's within a community, like if you're, I don't know, Jim Tarrant from the Brighton Buddhist Centre teaches yoga, nice guy, nice yoga teacher, I like him a lot. He'll get recognised a dozen times if me and him are, having a coffee in the centre of Brighton, because so many people have been through the Buddhist Centre. And then there's people that have been known a bit more internationally, particularly with the internet. Since we did the Embodiment conference, probably about once a week I get stopped. And this sort of comes weird expectations. Like I was putting my yoga mat away after Jim's class the other day, and didn't put it back neatly enough, I don't think, for someone's liking. And didn't fold the blanket in an Iyengar-ish OCD way. And somebody said, "Oh, I thought you were Mr. Embodiment, and they were sort of joking. But I was like, I just want to be anonymous. I want to teach, I just want to not even teach, I want to just be in the class or that class." Right. Like, can you say something about the sort of weird expectations or sort of this being known, but in a very small way that many teachers get now?
Yeah. I think it depends on the individual as to whether there's some teachers, or let's not even keep it as yoga teachers, people in the world who need that adulation for their own, to bolster their perhaps lack of self-worth. I personally have been through, of course, periods of that time in my own life where I've not felt as worthy as I perhaps have felt at others. And at those times you might feel that you need a bit of external accolade, a few trumpets here and there. But I believe as you become more and more comfortable within yourself, one needs that less and less and less. And that aspect of fame in whatever you do, I think that's a choice, really. I mean, it's like, yes, I know that I was very fortunate in the support of my teaching, in that over a number of years, I was approached consistently by national papers, magazines, things like that. I never once, although quite a few yoga teachers would contact me and say, "Who's your press agent?" I never had a press agent. I never had anybody who went out shopping for articles. I was approached, and I feel very fortunate for that.
Partly location, I imagine, right? Like I know there's teachers in LA or central London seem to get those kind of, there's a lot more, you know, to have someone from the BBC in their class or something like that.
Yeah. For me now, it's really unimportant. Although if somebody invites me, as you did, to share a conversation, I'm more than happy to do it. There's probably only one thing, one show, if you like, or podcast that exists that I'm aware of that I would absolutely love to do.
Russell Brand or someone? Which one is it?
No, it's Desert Island Discs, as it happens.
Ah, old school, nice. Okay. Just a fond of it.
I find it. I've always enjoyed listening to Desert Island Discs because I've always, as I said, all my years in the music business hasn't stopped me following and listening to music. And since I left the music business, my breadth of listening of genres of music and cultural sources of music has broadened dramatically. And but for many years, I've always wanted to. Wanted to go to the Desert Island Disc.
Some listeners might not know what that is, but is it? Do you want to just briefly say in a sentence what it is, Simon, for people?
Well, Desert Island Discs, I think many people have. It's on the BBC, and basically different interviewers who over the many years have chosen. Well, the program chooses individuals in every single walk of life, and you're asked what your 8 favorite songs are or pieces of music, and along with a little bit of an interview of your life, and then there's a couple of questions you're asked at the end of what book you would like, if you were on this desert island, what book you would have, what piece of music out of your 8 would be the one if you were only allowed one, and so forth. But I've always found I like meeting people through their interest in music.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Because I think it says a lot about people, and also what they say is what has triggered that affection for that piece of music. It's just something that's always interested me. Mm-hmm. And as I said, it's the only thing which might come under wanting to have the fame of being on it. It's not that I want the fame of being on it. I just would like the experience of doing it, because
just fun.
Always got my 8 songs. It changes from year to year. I've always got my 8 songs, just in case that last-minute phone call.
You get called up. For younger listeners, the BBC is like a YouTube channel that the government make you pay for. If people haven't heard of it. So in terms of you train a lot of yoga teachers, clearly got a beautiful place for it. It looks just fabulous. Who do you think's attracted to teaching yoga? Is it people that, like yourself, had a positive sort of healing experience? I get that when I interview people, I hear that a lot. It's like I had a bad X, it's either mental health or a bad back or bad knee. Then I did yoga and it helped me, so I wanted to help others. That's a pretty normal story. Yeah. I also wonder if there is a degree of you sort of saying, people working on their self-esteem, right? Like I've seen this with martial arts teachers as well. So I don't want to pick on yoga. It's a place where you sort of, you're the boss very much, right? And people have to breathe a certain way and do as they're told. And it's people with self-esteem issues perhaps, or people with, in the modern era, there's this wanting to be seen aspect to it. It's very visual now in a way that it didn't used to be, I don't think. What sort of trends do you see in who reaches out to become a yoga teacher? Because for very few people, it's the money, isn't it?
Yes, that's for sure. It's not a profession, a career that you're going to become wealthy. Actually, for those of us in Europe, I think that's more the case. There's no, some friends of mine in America have become multimillionaires. It's a very different market.
Yeah.
So much larger alone in itself, and a bit of an island in that perspective. Like, it's very difficult for, if, for example, a British yoga teacher to go and teach in America. And yet it doesn't seem to be very difficult for American teachers to come and teach in.
Oh, we've got that expectation, haven't we? I like getting Brits and other Europeans on the show because I get inundated with American teachers. And then sometimes I'm like, come on, let's spread this around a bit.
Well, thank you, Mark. I mean, you're absolutely right. In Europe, there are some fantastic yoga teachers with some very important teachings to share. But because they are not superstars in America, they don't get a look in magazines like Yoga Journal. They don't, and because of that kind of stardom that has come with front page of Yoga Journal and constantly being talked about, and the fact that American teachers can come to the UK and are celebrated as such. I brought many, because there's some excellent teachers. There's a perception that America, in some areas, especially to newcomers to yoga, that these big name American yoga teachers are actually better informed and are better teachers. And I don't believe this is the case. I believe that there are a lot of very, very skillful, compassionate with teachers in the UK that have, and in Europe, that have just as much, in many cases, if not more, to share.
Absolutely.
Because they have been teaching in a different environment where that superstardom projection and their receipt of it, and many of them that I've been to in over the years, so that superstardom has got to their egos a little bit, and they believe their own publicity. And I find that then translates to a very different experience in the classroom,
right,
which is not a very sincere reflection of yoga's teachings.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Although there's nothing in yoga that says you can't, in yoga's teachings, that you can't earn a good crust and that you can't be well known. It's how you act with that label, what you do with that money, how you behave in your negotiations with that money. I mean, I've had some negotiations with, when I was at Triyoga and since then at the Yoga Academy with very, very, very big name teachers. And I've been quite disappointed with the dialogue when it comes to share of what the workshop or the retreat or whatever it is, the money that it generates, how it gets proportioned and to where. I've been a little disappointed how the business side of it has been approached in a pretty strong manner that I don't think has been appropriate.
I've seen a huge shadow in that community, in that it's sort of, there's a denial of money as sort of too spiritual for it. And then what comes out is I've seen some very greedy behavior, and in a way that even just in regular business would not be okay. Yeah. In regular business would earn you a pretty bad reputation pretty quick, sort of just wanting the same standard if we're selling cheese, on tables. It's sort of a bit surprising to me at first, but yeah. And there's definitely that difference between the Brits and the Americans, and with kind of social media, people can kind of bypass that a little bit now. What advice would you have for kind of younger teachers coming up in terms of not getting inflated? Because I've been through inflation, deflation, ups and downs with it. Like, no one tells you not how to. It's easy to criticize, right? Like, there's some egomaniacs in this world, let's be fucking honest. But no one tells you how not to be an egomaniac when there's 50 good-looking girls in Lycra, doing your every command. What's your advice on how not to get the ego involved with it?
Firstly, as much as you possibly can, leave yourself outside of the classroom with all your stuff that's going on, and we all have our stuff that's going on, particularly now with one's, economic challenges, and you might be going through personal problems. You might be even having a disagreement with a place that you are teaching, which of course happens on occasion. You have to leave it outside. And I've found that something that's been helpful to me is that I keep reminding myself these teachings they're not coming from me, they're coming through me. Meaning that at the end of the day, what we are all as yoga teachers are doing is we are, I'm going to put it really in a vulgar term, we're regurgitating ancient teachings, what we have learned also in a more contemporary field, with the color and tone of our own unique self. And as a voice, that's obviously something that inevitably happens, but as it comes through ourselves, can this vessel be as clear as possible? It doesn't have to be as pure as possible, because this whole idea that a yoga teacher has to be pure to be a yoga teacher, this is complete rubbish. We're all fallible human beings that have our day-to-day stuff just like everybody else. We just hopefully, we have happened to have come across yoga. It has changed our lives. And as a result, as you said, we choose to want to share that. But we're still ultimately the same human being. May have changed our way of thinking a little bit, may have changed our perspectives, may have changed our behavior, hopefully. And that's an ongoing basis, but we're still fundamentally the same person.
Yeah.
And we have not become this, if there's one thing I abhor, it's this holier than thou attitude that some teachers adopt. You can be as spiritual as me if you just keep doing this or what I say. And I think we have to recognize, our stuff, which we will have just like everybody else. If we're going to help other people with their stuff, we've got to dump ours outside of the classroom, outside of our personal conversations and therapeutic meetings, if we're having them with individuals, and be present to that person. Yes, you cultivate the boundaries within those conversations and classes, but you must be open-hearted, open-minded, and open to being present to that person rather than them being present to you.
Gorgeous. Love it. Thank you. And in terms of what you teach now, my sense is it's evolved. It seemed like you had some Iyengar background, Deshakatara, and then you were talking about somatics earlier before we hit record. How has what you're teaching evolved?
I think it's evolved. I was fortunate to have a very helpful foundation from Larry Payne, who had spent many years in India with Deshakatara, A.G. Mohan. He'd even studied at the feet of Krishnamacharya. And he was a very down-to-earth, kind and present man who didn't have any of the, while there were some names growing in LA at the time were becoming superstars, he just never was part of that whole area, that whole market area, even though he was only a mile away from one of the busiest two of the busiest studios in Los Angeles. He just had a very humble, beautiful studio with its own little garden. And he was very content there, and that contentment with who he was and how he taught came through. And you felt that there was no competitiveness in the classroom, which whenever I went to Yoga Works or Before it became exhale, it was something movement. Forgotten the name off the top of my head, and it was a very different environment in those classes and the people who attended them. And so I felt very fortunate that I didn't evolve in my early days of study and experience in that kind of competitive, look at me, look what I'm wearing, sort of environment. While there were some excellent teachers like Eric Schiffman, for example, who just gave me so much, but I really had to concentrate and be present in a much more, I had to almost set a virtual fence around myself in the classroom because it was so Hollywood. Whereas with Larry, it was very, very, it was beautiful. And I've forgotten what got me on this. Oh, yes. And so, I had this excellent foundation of this, what was called at that time, Yoga. Mm-hmm. And then I explored it, virtually every other approach to yoga you can think of, sometimes for a few years, sometimes only for a few weeks, and would invariably take a retreat with a well-known teacher in any one of those systems, which I did to almost every single one. Qigong had been something that I had met before I even started yoga, and that came later. About 15 years ago, I started to bring it back in. And today, in my Zoom class, there was a whole section of Qigong-inspired movement. But of late, I've really found that the teachings from Feldenkrais and Thomas Hanna in particular, through the contemporary teachers such as Martha Peterson, Lisa Peterson, and others in Europe, the sharing of somatics, just so needed right now, more than ever before. Mm-hmm. Say that about yoga, I could say that about Qigong, but somatics, what I've noticed is since I've incorporated somatics more deeply into my classes and one-to-one work, I've noticed how it's been transformational very quickly.
What do you think's different? Because I've seen my own yoga practice has got way more like Feldenkrais, having done a little bit of that now. I still sort of use the basic asanas as a base, but then I get Feldenkrais-y with them. Pete Blackaby is a big influence on me here. He's partner's Feldenkrais teacher. But it seems like a lot of yogis evolve into something a bit like Feldenkrais, a bit more somatic approach over time, starting with more rigid asanas and then moving into a bit more of a felt feeling, sometimes spontaneous sense. Where do you think that is? Is it a natural evolution? Is it a trend? Where do you think that's coming from?
I can only speak for myself and those teachers who are a little longer in the tooth or more miles on the tires, if you like. I feel that the primary desire is to heal others. And as with more and more experience, you realize, okay, there's lower back conditions, there is the frozen shoulders, whatever it may be. But there's a much deeper meaning often behind, or influence behind those conditions. And so we delve more into the psychological, emotional condition, if you like, of the individual and individuals. And there is a fundamental shift in how what we practice with our body, the response that we receive when what we share has a reference to and an understanding of, through looking at posture, movement patterns, behavioral patterns, start to recognize where individuals are holding their stuff. It's like you don't need to know the story. That's the job for a professional psychotherapist. It's not about the story. It's about where is this story impacting this individual on a physical and energetic level. And that shows up sometimes in a very obvious way, sometimes in a more subtle way, but it shows up, as Thomas Henner would perhaps say, in everybody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just as in the psychology of Patanjali, the klesha, the five afflictions, they show up in everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So do our lives. Our biography becomes our biology, as many people have said before. And it's learning to see and notice and to help where this can be, where healing can occur without getting involved in the actual story itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Words,
Yeah.
the images, the experiences.
And you mentioned a Zoom class earlier. So have you been part of the sort of Zoom revolution the last few years of people teaching on Zoom? And with that center and all the retreats, I'm not sure if you probably don't have to, but it sounds like you're doing some teaching on Zoom.
Well, we were closed for nearly 2 years.
Wow.
And having opened 5 years earlier, it had taken us 5 years to build up towards a full calendar. We allowed time, obviously, for maintenance and that, but 2020 was a full calendar, and we'd invested quite a lot in certain areas of the retreat. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. We were then closed for 1.5 years and managed to do
you survive, yeah, with that, because you must have some overheads with that center.
Massive overhead still, especially if you're a business in Spain where the help from the EU that many countries received was never passed down to businesses here. We didn't have any of the help that, for example, the British government gave. We had to just borrow, and that's to survive. And so it's been tough. And one of the also things I realized too was I was losing touch with a treasured community of yoga students who were no longer able to come here or to any of the other retreats. And I had only that year in 2019 stopped working out of Commonwealth Farm in Kent, where I had been running regular retreats and weekends for 26 years. So I realized I was going to have to reconnect, and the only way to do that was online. And I was pretty rubbish at it at first. And our internet signal wasn't particularly good either at that time. But I soldiered through it and started to become a little bit more comfortable with it. Now I actually very much look forward to my Monday morning and Thursday morning Zoom classes.
Twice a week's good, huh? Like I teach on Zoom 3 times a week, 3 or 4, and it's enough. Like 3 or 4 hours a week's enough. I wouldn't want to be doing it all day like some of my friends are. And you've got a decent mic now. You're aware of the lighting. You seem to have come a long way with it, Simon. It's is there anything you love teaching before we wrap up, Simon? Is there anything like, this is my favorite thing, this is something I always look forward to when I see it on the teacher training schedule or whatever?
I really enjoy the blending of different influences into the, if you like, onto the horse of yoga, whether that be maybe you can see it as a coat hanger or as the horse from within the Katha Upanishad. There's how, if yoga's the kind of central guiding light, I love to experience how different individuals, schools of thought have brought other teachings into this sphere of light, and or hung different teachings in alongside this central pillar of yoga. And I do find that really enjoyable and fascinating, because for me it's all yoga. I don't really appreciate these strict, that's not yoga, it's qigong. Well, maybe it could be labeled qigong, but we are practicing yoga together. You know, it's all yoga. It's and as such, I really enjoy, you know, as I said, that aspect of experiencing other people's way of viewing this vast field and their way of sharing it. Teaching methodology I find really interesting because so there's so many teachers teaching so many different ways, and you learn from everybody, and you both of things that might be helpful, and also you learn things that are less helpful in sharing through the experience of being a student.
I wonder, yoga is kind of the world's by far the most popular embodied practice. I do see it taking on these other influences. I like this idea of it being kind of a central hook to hang other things off, to connect other things with, you know, whether it's, I don't know, Julie Martin bringing in more dance type work, or Tara Gale bringing in body mind centering. I notice a lot of the yoga teachers I like, even, you know, Gary Carter down the road bringing his weightlifting experience. You know, he's got a whole nother, you know, anatomical fascial experience. It feels like that might be a interesting future for yoga. So
yeah, I really believe that yoga will be here certainly for our lifetime, and hopefully our children's lifetimes and beyond. But I do believe that, yes, there are going to be many other flowers growing in the same pot, but the central blooming stalk of yoga will be hopefully central to it, because it is so inclusive a practice. Mm-hmm. If it is authentically shared. Mm-hmm. You know, it's this idea that this way of practicing yoga is wrong and this one is the only right way, and all of these sort of ring-fenced approach.
That's broken down now, Simon. Like, the cat's out of the bag there. Like, you know, I ask people what kind of yoga they do now, and they say, well, it's complicated. I do some of this, and I've had this influence from Qigong, and I did a bit of Aikido, and, you know, that's more common now than I do Ashtanga, or I do Iyengar. It's more common. And have you seen that people have gone back to yoga fully after COVID? Because a lot of classes around the world seem to be pretty down in numbers. I guess you're in contact with a lot of people. Is it that people haven't come back for economic reasons, still kind of cautious, got out of the habit of leaving the house? Are people on Zoom instead? Are they off doing something else? But it seems like around the world, a lot of yoga classes are pretty quiet.
Studios are definitely quieter. Many of the studios have suffered greatly, and many have closed, or closed one of, you know, if they might have had more than one branch. Numbers are definitely down from where I see it on retreats, and even, you know, and since the pandemic has become less present, people are not coming to Zoom class in the numbers that they were before.
No, not Zoom either, right? Zoom's also
exactly. Everything's taken and part of it, of course, at the very beginning, when suddenly people were able to go and travel and go here and go there without masks and being terrified to be within 20 meters of somebody. Once that fear had dispelled somewhat, I think people just wanted to get out and do something different. Get out of their rituals and their you know, what had become daily schedules, or get away from some of the less helpful habits that had become intrinsic to being stuck at home. And but it's coming back. I don't think it'll ever be the same again for studios and big group situations. But I do think that online yoga will still be a regular offering with a lot of interest for many years to come. Many students have said to me, oh no, I really enjoy practicing in my home. I've now created a sacred space for where I practice, converted the old kids' room or an old office, or I've done out the attic or something.
There's huge advantages in terms of accessibility, in terms of travel. I remember when I was staying in London, I'd go to a yoga class, get stressed out on the tube, relax at yoga, get stressed out on the tube on the way back, and think, why did I ever go to yoga? Yeah. For other people, it's the time cost is effectively doubled. Going to a yoga class, you've got to travel to for half an hour. There's accessibility issues for people with disabilities. There's all sorts of reasons. As you say, I think it's here to stay, at least some form part of the package.
Yeah.
Okay,
you're absolutely right. It's from a cost perspective.
Yeah,
people are able to. They may not have the personal one-to-one contact in the class, but they do have a direct contact in a different sense of personal.
Yeah.
By themselves in their home, where they may feel even more comfortable, and at home, and it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah,
both in terms of the currency of time,
yes,
as well as the currency of money.
Yeah, I don't think yoga teachers necessarily have figured out that it will just market terms will lead to greater niching, because you can go to something very specialized taught on the other side of the world, and also less yoga teachers because it scales.
Yeah,
and that if say every yoga teacher was losing a quarter of their students to Zoom from face-to-face classes, they're not going to be spread out equally. They're going to cluster around better known teachers, better teachers, hopefully, and better niche teachers. So it's there's a few factors there that are going to radically change the face of things as things kind of settle. Listen, Simon, I can smell my dinner being cooked, which is a rare occurrence, but I'm tremendously grateful for. So I better not miss it. Where do people find you, Simon? You've got a few websites. Where's the best place to go?
Probably the best starting point, if it's in relation to teacher training and retreats, and where I'm teaching around the world, is just to go to simonlow.com, LOW without an E. And for online yoga, I started a portal called homeyoga.life. So it's www.homeyoga.life.
Great. And I've got 5 websites, I think. We'll put all of them on the podcast page, which is on embodimentunlimited.com, if people want to go through there and see all the others. And having had just an accidental guided tour of the centre, it does look absolutely gorgeous. For the centre alone, I'd be tempted to go out there. So, people should. That's on Simon's website. You can see
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. It is very special. And many teachers who have come to bring retreats here, a large number of them say it's on first visits now become their favorite retreat center and best equipped yoga wise too that they've ever been to anywhere in the world. So it looks
yeah. Okay, last question just very quickly, because I don't get to ask this very often. What football team do you support?
Tottenham Hotspur.
Oh no. Okay, there's just because we wanted to smash the stereotypes of yoga teachers. Simon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay.
Mark Walsh here. If you like that, you probably like embodimentunlimited.com and our app. So on both of these things, you can get a bunch of podcasts that aren't available here, some exclusive ones with some big names, some people you'll probably recognize that are over there. There's a copy of my book, PDF of my first book on embodiment, which seems that people like. I sold quite a few copies on Amazon, but there's a free copy there. What else is there? Loads of videos of me coaching embodiment, resources on trauma, on meditation, on yoga. And you can also chat to people without going on Facebook or any of that nonsense. So if you want to chat embodiment with people, that's there. And it's on the embodimentunlimited.com, all free, and the app available at the App Store and all that good stuff. So if you like this, do check those out.